have some well-versed speakers that know their stuff. And again, I can't thank them enough. NorthMarq, which Michael Chase is part of, or I should even say NorthMarq. Michael Chase is the man of NorthMarq. And I want to thank our other sponsor, which is U.S. Pavement Services. They are both annual sponsors and can't thank them enough for being so. And there is our handsome panel. And there is your moderator for the day. I'm Rick Kaplan from the New England Real Estate Journal.
Also handsome.
Well, thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. I have been told that once before. But that was 25, 30 years ago. I can't even remember how long ago. New England Real Estate, inform, engage, and connect. We have been around almost 60 years. This is not correct. It used to be 55. Now we're almost 60 years and keep growing. We have been growing and growing. Even during this pandemic, I think we've seen a tremendous growth as well. If you don't get our digital edition, please subscribe to that. Digital subscription has been growing in leaps and bounds, especially due to this pandemic. We also have our webinars, as well as our weekly New England Real Estate Journal paper that comes out every week with all kinds of great information throughout the New England and New England market. And we also have the New York Real Estate Journal, which covers all regions of the state of New York. Well, I guess we can now begin. Again, I want to thank our sponsors, NorthMarq and U.S. Pavement, and I want to introduce our panel for the day, for the morning. Michael Chase from NorthMarq. We have Kendra Kenney from Pomerleau Real Estate. Justin Lamontagne, I'm sorry, the Dunham Group, NAI, the Dunham Group.
God, we practiced this last week, Rick.
I know. You know what? I'm slow. I am the worst with
we'll get
names. There. I said it right the first time, and then I screwed it up. Hey.
Yeah.
All right.
It's all right. It's all right. I'll come back. Don't worry.
Hey, Justin, in 10 years, I'll have it down pat. I know it. I just need that time. Well, we're going to start with Michael Chase. And Michael, how is the finance picture looking in the Northern New England market? As far as the interest rates, the changes in the new administration, changes in tax incentives, what are you seeing?
First of all, Rick, thank you for having me on your panel this morning. I'm glad to be here, especially here with Kendra and Justin and yourself. It's a very broad question, Rick. There's a lot of things going on in commercial real estate finance right now. Certainly, interest rates are starting to move up. The 10-year Treasury is now up to the same point as it was a year ago. At this, 1 year ago, this was before kind of COVID really took hold of everything and stopped the world. The 10-year Treasury was, at 1.39%, and that's where we're at today. So at that same level, the difference is a year ago, the yield curve was inverted. You had an overnight rate that was around 1.8, and today it's 0 to a quarter. You had a 30-year Treasury that was below 2, and now it's over 2. So the difference is the 10-year Treasuries are the same, but the yield curve is more normalized. There's upward pressure on long-term rates. But the good news for borrowers is there's room in the spreads. There's room for spreads to compress, and overall mortgage rates are still near historic lows. There's a lot of capital out there looking to get involved and invest in mortgages. The life insurance companies and pension funds on the institutional side all have renewed their allocations or increased their allocations for the upcoming year. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and FHA still continue to be market leaders for multifamily finance, and the banks remain strong. There were certainly some periods last year and the beginning of this year where maybe some of the local banks were distracted by needing to get out PPP loans for their customers, but that even now that is starting to cool off a bit and allowing them to refocus on commercial real estate. You're gonna, on the banking side, you will find that there may be some banks that, you know, if they had some exposure to hotels or hospitality, they might be a little bit more quiet right now. And there's also certainly a focus from the banks on working with their existing clients first, or in particular, key sponsors. But overall, the finance market is strong. There's plenty of capital. Rates remain low for now. And we're helping our clients kind of lock in rates for later this year, trying to get them locked in while rates are still attractive.
Well, thank you, Michael. I appreciate your information. I'm sure everyone else does as well. We're going to move on to Justin. And can you give us an overview on what's happening in the main market and what you've seen in the industrial, the retail, office, and hospitality space?
Yeah. Sure, Rick. Thank you, and thanks as always for the opportunity to present at this conference. It's always fun. It's fun live. I've met a lot of great people down in New Hampshire and Portsmouth, where you usually host it, and I hope and look forward to getting back in person. But this is fun too, and you know, a different way. And I don't want to get ahead of the questions, but I think we're going to talk about some of the bright sides of this whole experience. And really, this sort of is, and we were talking about it in the networking part, that the virtual opportunity allows us to attend more things, see more things, more cost effectively. It's not as fun probably, and maybe it's not quite as exactly productive, but I think that is a bright side, that we can virtually connect from a distance. So, but anyways, to answer your question, very broad question, like Mike was saying, but I think the short answer is it depends on what sector we're talking about in terms of commercial. You know, the different silos and sectors have been really dramatically impacted differently, I think, and also project differently post-COVID. So my focus and area of expertise is industrial market, and I think like most markets, Southern Maine's industrial sector held up extremely well, if not better than ever through the pandemic. It was a healthy sector prior. You know, if you stop and think about when we first heard what an essential business is, quote unquote essential business, nobody knew what that was in March or before March or April of 2020. But you think about what those businesses were right out of the gate, they were very much industrial in nature. It was manufacturing, it was food production, it's food distribution, it's all the things, the basic necessities of life that all of us need and take for granted are industrial in nature. So that sector really had steady demand and incredible growth, and I think real great growth opportunities moving forward. So I'm excited to see what happens in the industrial market. The office market is in Maine, in Southern Maine, sort of a mixed bag. There was a lot of hesitation and there's a very tentative market, especially in the early parts of the pandemic, in that no one was in the office. So we did a lot of 6-month renewals, 1-year renewals, just kind of get us through this very unknown and scary period, and get us into a time, you know, probably in the summer of 21, where we have a better feel and understanding as to when this pandemic is going to be over, number one. But also businesses have had an opportunity to think about how are they to use physical office space moving forward in a post-COVID world. Are they going to use physical office space? And I think early on, a lot of the negative naysayers were saying, well, it's over. The office is going to implode. No one's going to go back to the office. And I think clearly, now that we've had some time to digest this and live in this world, that's true. It's going to be sort of, it's going to be different. And I don't think the office market is going to crash by any means. It will come back, but the way we're going to use physical office space is going to be different. how that impacts footprints, actual physical footprints, and what landlords really care about, square footage, remains to be seen. So in the Portland market specifically, we're starting to see signs of life in the office sector, which is great. We're getting calls on listings, largely suburban. Downtown is really quiet, which is really interesting. I'm not sure exactly what to make of that, but my sense is that there's still this sort of fear of being in crowded places, and downtown is just going to be a more, crowded area. So right now, the activity in terms of tenant demand is really outside the city, in the suburbs of Portland. And then just briefly on retail, I don't do a lot of retail, but I don't think it takes a retail expert to just walk down any main street and see the for lease signs and the closed, our beloved restaurants and bars. A lot of retailers were hit very hard. They held on through the early days of a lot of government subsidies and incentives, but the winter, particularly in Maine, closed a lot of shops. There's just no way around it. There's no way to sugarcoat it. So I'm hopeful the ones that are still hanging in there can continue to hang in there, because we're so close to what we call summer in Maine, which would be like, the first 50-degree day in April. We're all going to go outside in our shorts and t-shirts, and that's when, maybe there'll be some more traffic and we can return to some outdoor style seating and things like that for restaurants. But sad story is that a lot of them just didn't make it, and those are certainly the losers in this whole thing. Now, on the other hand, there are some winners in the retail market. If you think about home improvement and anything to do with, home appliances, outdoor apparel, there's a lot of retailers that really did very well through this, and I think will continue to do so. But the classic restaurant and bar scene is still really struggling. So that's a long answer to a broad question, but we can drill down further later in the presentation. I'm curious to see what's going on.
We'll get into more of that. I just want to translate to the people that are living down south that are viewing this, that what Justin said, 50 degrees, that would mean like 80 degrees to someone that lives in Florida.
Yeah, exactly. That's a warm day.
That's right.
I can't wait for 50.
Yeah, that's what we would consider that like summer here. So let's move on to Kendra, and pretty much the same question. What do you see going on in the Vermont market? And before you get to that, I just also want to mention that if anyone wants to read a great article that Kendra wrote that is in the New England Real Estate Journal, it covers an awful lot of information that is going on in the Vermont market. And now you can go.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to kind of give an update from Vermont and what's happening up here. Just to dive right into your question. So I would say, and I kind of agree with Justin, since the new year, we've really started to see the Vermont market start to rebound. People are kind of coming out of their home offices, coming back down to our downtown. As a state, we really rely on tourism and our universities. And now with our college students back, and it's now the winter months, so people are starting to get outside, come skiing, come cross-country skiing, get to do those outdoor activities. We really are starting to see people come back to the state. We generally were hit just as hard as everybody else. Office and retail took the biggest hit here. Over the last year, we've seen about a 3% increase in vacancy rates for our office sector and about a 4.7% increase in retail. Our downtown, if you've never been here, is pretty much a 5-block strip of retail and restaurants that are all walkable. And so when everything was shut down in Vermont, everything came to a screeching halt there. Nobody was downtown. Nobody was going to our retailers or our small business owners. So they were hit really hard. And we originally saw kind of a mass exodus because that's where the highest rents are really focused as well. In the last handful of months, we've already started to see people coming back to our downtown. We don't have as many just empty vacant spaces. They really are starting to fill back up. Our landlords have really started to get creative with rent deferments or just a lower rent for the time being, because it's a very local community. We don't want to see vacancies. We want to see a vibrant downtown. I would say our industrial sector definitely did pretty well. We have a 2.5% vacancy rate right now, which is a 10-year low. That sector, we saw it nationally and we definitely saw it in Vermont, really wasn't hit hard. We have a lot of manufacturing. We have a lot of farming that needs to be brought indoors in the wintertime. So they really didn't see the hard hit that some of our office and retail users saw. Now, coming into 2021, we've really started to see both office and retail users get really creative. So just speaking from experience, because the company that I work for, they own about 1.7 million square feet in retail space in the Vermont area. Landlords are getting really creative with repurposing retail space. So big boxes are downsizing or transitioning to different uses. And a lot of retailers, at least in our Vermont market, have started to come together and try to creatively share spaces. So before, where you would see maybe a fitness studio and a juice bar and a boutique all having their own spaces, local groups are coming together and sharing one larger space so that everybody can go to one place and save on rent. We've seen that a number of times happening in probably in the last 6 months, just kind of consolidation of like-minded business users. Same with office. People on the smaller side are ready to get out of their home office. It's just everybody's been home for too long. So we're definitely seeing the under 2,000 square foot office spaces really fill up. There isn't really that much vacancy in those sizes. And then above that, the 10,000 square foot and under, we're seeing people already start to rethink their space. How can we repurpose it? How can we give back some of it, but not all of it? Definitely think business owners here are going to come back. It's just going to be in a slightly different way. So we're already starting to try and creatively repurpose those spaces so that when people are ready to come out of their home offices, the spaces are ready for them, and we're ready to kind of hit the ground running.
Well, thank you, Kendra. The next questions, I'm opening them up for all three of you. And we want to talk a little bit about what you see as far as repurposing of offices or for retail, even hospitality. Are you seeing that? And Michael, are you seeing any that people are coming in for new building loans, or even to remodel or repurpose a property? So that's something that all three of you can have a little time to talk about.
Sure, Rick. Great question. There are certainly opportunities to reposition a property and try to be creative and think about how you can take it and repurpose it for a better, higher, better use. And we do see some of those loan requests come in, certainly.
I can jump in. On the hospitality side, we've been really lucky. Vermont has a lot of hotels and motels that are kind of run down, and they're not really in city centers. They're outside of town, and they've just become kind of an eyesore over time. And people really looked over them in the past, and we saw a lot of local investors and developers take the pandemic as an opportunity to purchase some of those rundown hotels and motels and redevelop them into things that we really need as a state. So we've seen a lot of senior care facilities start to open up in these old motel and hotel locations, but full redevelopment. So they're being beautified and really upping that area. And then also bringing something that the state really needs. We have an aging population, so senior housing is something that's super important to us. So seeing that development really come to our state has been very helpful. And on the retail side of things too, we've seen a lot of small retail restaurants that maybe were just like a cafe or only had 20 to 25 seats be repurposed as ghost kitchens, because a lot of our local community of restaurants have started doing a lot of catering, delivery, and they've seen it really benefit their businesses. So we've also seen that transition, not getting rid of restaurants completely, but transitioning the smaller ones so that they have a much more beneficial use.
I'm having a classic Zoom moment. My dog and two children just burst into my room. So I missed a lot of what Kendra said.
Oh, have them join us.
Unbelievable. It's like, no, that did happen, but I heard most of what Kendra said. So in terms of repurposing and repositioning, I think there's going to have to be for certain assets, and in particular, I think about big box retail. And big news in Maine market, I think in other states, is Cinemagic just closed two really hugely successful movie theaters in the greater Portland area, which are 50,000 square foot well-positioned, well-located buildings that just aren't going to be movie theaters in the future. So what can they be? They could be Israel, certainly. And I think if you look at some of these other, JCPenney's and Kmart's, those are just big warehouses, really, at the end of the day, in retail settings. So I think that's going to be the lowest hanging fruit in terms of repositioning some real estate. It's going to take certainly cooperative landlords and property owners that want to do it. I think they will, because they just, they need the rent. But it'll also take cooperative municipalities to rethink zoning and look at code. It'll also take cooperative tenants. A lot of retailers have restrictions on who their neighbors can be, and maybe certain strip center of retailers that are in business don't want the Kmart that's at the end of their center to turn into a distribution center. That's very reasonable and fair, and they may have the right within their lease to not permit it. So it's not as easy as just seeing an empty building and saying, hey, that's a warehouse. There's more to it, but there is there for sure. And then I noticed in the chat, Peyton was mentioning conversion of office space into lab space. That we've seen locally as well, for sure. And in particular, I think as a result of the pandemic and some of the work that our local businesses in the life science field are focusing on, Maine's got some great businesses and companies that are sort of on the leading edge of some of this stuff. Abbott Labs is headquartered here, Jackson Labs, MDI, ITech. They're all in this, not just vaccine world, but treatment world, testing world, creating actual product that we're all using for to combat this pandemic. And they're all thriving and growing. So they've taken some old Class B office that you'd think is just going to sit there forever, and it does convert well and nicely to more space. We've also seen a lot of impact in the industrial market from the life science, also converting warehouse into laboratory space. That they require a lot of power, they require large open footprints. So industrial does lend itself very nicely to sort of the life science market as well, sector.
And if I could interject for a moment on the capital side, if it's well located and there's a strong business plan and there's a good team behind it, it will find capital. Right now, there is generally a kind of a risk-on mentality when it comes to bridge financing, and the bridge capital is becoming pretty cheap out there. So you either working with a bank or a private lender. Again, if it's well located, it's a good business plan, and there's a good team behind it, there's capital for it.
That's very interesting, Michael, because there's going to be a lot of these major restaurateurs that have been hurt during this whole thing. And they're going to want to come back, I'm sure, because that's the business they know. When they come back, obviously they're going to look for money, but they have the experience, they have a proven track record, and they obviously had a great business plan, but no one could predict a pandemic, so if they come to a lender with that plan, with their knowledge of the business and their proven track record, would that be something that banks would be willing to look at and say, yeah, this we understand and we know this is going to work for us?
I would say that you picked one of the certainly one of the areas of challenge right now, restaurants. Even before COVID, restaurants are viewed in many different ways, as being cyclical, right? So it really will come down to the operator, the location, the track record. For many banks, the most common way to do a restaurant financing is through an SBA loan. And right now, SBA is not doing restaurant financing. So that could change, that could come back. And if that does, it could enable the banks to be more active in that area. But at the moment, I would say restaurant financing are one of those asset classes which are certainly a challenge.
But you can get creative with it.
Certainly, if there's a good, strong sponsorship behind it, it's well located, and you're willing to pay the yield, there's probably some private wealth or some other private capital that could come in, potentially, sure.
Okay.
Michael, this kind of reminds me of a situation I'm going through with a tenant that is applying to lease a sizable amount of space, and we're through the vetting of this tenant on behalf of the landlord. And the question that's come up is, how do you underwrite and how do you look at the 2020 year? And this is not a restaurant, this is an office user, but whose business was impacted by the pandemic, and it stands to reason it'll change. You can see a path of 15 years of growth and success, and then this 2020 complete weird blip, and then, you know, who knows what 21 is going to look like. But it's just the first time I've realized that, oh, we're going to have to start looking at 2020 with an asterisk. And I'm wondering how banks will look at that. Are they just going to, I mean, I guess you can't ignore it, but how do you underwrite that? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Sure, and it's going to vary between whether or not, how much exposure do you have to that particular tenant? Is it a 1 or 2 tenant building, or is it a multi-tenant building? Do you have a diversified tenant base? If you have a lot of exposure to a particular credit, then what is the story there? Are there other additional credit enhancements that could be added into a deal? Some partial recourse on the sponsor. One interesting use case that I found recently was the use of a surety bond to help, you know, again, one of the things that came up last year was landlords and tenants, they had business loss interruption insurance, and they quickly found out that that didn't cover them in the case of a pandemic. And so there was this gap of risk coverage that developed, and right now it's certainly being litigated through the courts as to, you know, what can happen there. But you know, is there another creative solution to help kind of, again, paper over a story of, well, this tenant, you know, what is their credit profile? You know, what is their history? Is it a letter of credit that they're going to post for a short period of time? Is there some other credit enhancement that could be available to help with the underwriting?
That's going to be very interesting going forward, because like Justin just said, you know, 2020, that interruption, is that something that lenders will just wipe out and not look at? Because, you know, how can you take a company that has been, you know, has a thriving business for many years, and then they have that 1 year where there's a pandemic that affected, and, you know, going forward, they'll probably go right back to being a thriving company, you know, so. You know, I kind of, you know, that's something that would have to be looked at seriously.
Certainly, and I think lenders always try to underwrite and look at what are extraordinary income or expenses. And you try to smooth things out and look at what are typical operating costs. I mean, there have been certainly added operating expenses as a result of COVID, added cleaning costs, added build out to make a space safer. Are those going to continue to be operating expenses that are ongoing, or were they extraordinary? So I think many lenders will look at that. And of course, a lot of that will also come back to the valuation. How will appraisers look at that? Is that something that they're going to make an adjustment for in their valuation? Or will they also look at it as an extraordinary event and, you know, see the value of the property as being what it was either before this all happened or continue to be at a certain spot going forward?
I'll also be interested to see, we've been faced with a lot of new builds and people buying land and then getting ready to build a new construction, but because material costs are up 20 to 30% when you're looking at lumber, steel, metal buildings, I will be interested to see how banks handle, if your building cost is up by 20%, is your appraisal going to be up by that much when you get in? And then how is that going to affect the rents for new tenants coming into a building that cost 20 to 30% more to build than it did in 2019?
Yes, construction is another area that's a challenge right now, and certainly not only the additional cost of materials, but the additional timelines that have been a result of COVID. You know, just getting your inspectors in, or having your workers, having to have them spaced out and shift. So it's all, you know, those are all challenges that have come up, and there are capital solutions. Each of those is an individual case-by-case basis, right? You look at it and you say, do the numbers still work? Am I able to project forward based on what we feel will be the return to market. Was the pro forma before based on a growth rate that we're not going to be able to achieve, or were the numbers based on something that is achievable and we can continue to move forward? There are certainly cases where some construction deals need to be recapitalized, and maybe what was done with the bank now has to now needs a private debt fund solution. Perhaps there can be some creative layering of additional vehicles. One thing that's come out as of late is called Cpace Financing. It stands for Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy. It's a way of, getting going up that capital stack. It's available in New Hampshire. It's not available in Vermont. It's going through the legislative process for approval in Maine. But it could be a form of additional debt. If the bank is not willing to get there, maybe they can layer in the Cpace financing on top. So that's just one example of maybe an additional creative solution that could help a project continue to move forward.
We'll move on from that. That's a touchy subject in some form. You need to have a professional, I think, that if you're going to go into any kind of refinancing or financing of anything, you need to have someone that really knows their stuff when you're applying for any kind of financing right now, because there's so many pieces that you have to put together when you're putting this in front of a bank or private lenders. Now, we're seeing a lot, and this is something that's happening throughout the country, is a lot of storage facilities, that for data, recreational toys like boats and RVs, I said data, self-storage. Is that something you would see? And I would think you would see something like that in Vermont and Maine, in New Hampshire, because that's where you bring all your toys.
Yeah, we've always
self-storage.
Sorry, go ahead, Justin.
Go ahead.
In Vermont, we've always seen a lot of self-storage just because it's a very recreational state. There's people do a lot of boating in the summer and then winter activities. So self-storage has always been pretty big. We haven't seen the data centers shift here yet, but there has been a big push just on a state level. Our kind of central area is Chittenden County, kind of in northern Vermont, but southern Vermont, there's a lot of land, warehouse space, just area for businesses to grow. And economically, it's an area in the state that could really use it. And so I think in the future, we would definitely see the state pushing, if data centers are coming to the state, if there's going to be a influx in that type of thing, pushing it to the southern area just to drive economic growth in that region for sure.
Yeah, self-storage is interesting. It's certainly one of the more popular assets prior to COVID, just simply that it's easy to manage. And but I think the pandemic has really even made it more popular. There's several new construction projects happening as we speak for self-storage in Greater Portland, and they're beautiful, high-class facilities, world-class facilities, and they're full. So as a result, the investment demand and interest has really increased as well. I mean, we're seeing some of the lowest cap rates for any asset class for self-storage, which is really interesting. And so the demand from a buyer's perspective is quite high in that sector. And then just, storage of toys and things like that, like Vermont, Maine is a super outdoors, healthy state. So we've got plenty of toys to store as well.
And so, Rick, you mentioned two areas of opportunity as we're looking forward to 2021 and going forward. Self-storage is certainly is an asset class that's financeable. It's relatively easy to underwrite. It's predominantly a demographics play. You can, apply a couple of simple demographic metrics and determine whether or not there's enough supply to meet the demand for additional self-storage units within a given market area. Certainly, if you can get a national property manager, that would help, but not always needed. And then you mentioned data centers. That's another kind of hot growth area. The market is certainly dominated by the big boys, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, IBM. But I think where the Northern New England markets would benefit from there is the drive towards edge computing. And edge computing is kind of the digital version of last mile delivery that you've heard on the industrial side, right? It's needing to get those data processing centers closest to those end users. And as we're seeing more and more of a development for Internet of Things, a progression towards, hopefully driverless vehicles at some point, you're going to see more and more of a need for smaller edge computing centers. And that's where perhaps areas like Northern New England could benefit from those.
Well, and now we're talking about some, there's land, lots of land in, Maine and Vermont and New Hampshire that it's available for industrial space. Might not be used so much for residential, but it's great for industrial use. The Biden administration has got a big push, and this is kind of controversial for a lot of people, for renewable energy and energy efficient products and services. Are you seeing a surge or interest for land or industrial space for these type of industries?
In Vermont, we're a very green state. We've been pushing renewable energies for a really long time. And so I wouldn't say since the pandemic or 2019 to 2021, we've seen a huge increase, but we've always been pretty solid in that sector. We have a number of our large employers for the state are renewable energy companies. So Seventh Generation, SunCommon, we have a number of solar companies. The state has a number of solar fields. So they've really been pushing that for a long time. The state also has a lot of incentives, both for business owners and for individuals. If you create a LEED certified building for your business, or if you're an individual and you buy an electric car, the state has a lot of rebates for that kind of thing. So they've really been driving that sector for a long time. I think with the Biden administration, we're just only going to see even more of that and more growth in that sector, but we haven't in recent months seen a huge push for it, but I think we already kind of had a corner on that market. So I think we'll just see continued growth in that sector.
I was on a Zoom call this morning. There was a presentation by the head of the University of Maine Composites Division, Advanced Projects. And the University of Maine is really interesting in what they're working on up there along these lines. They're focusing on a couple things. The biggest being trying to harness renewable energy and kind of take advantage of some of the natural things that we have here in Maine. In particular, tidal energy, which is kind of cool. They've got actual turbines out in the ocean generating electricity, which is really neat. And then, of course, wind and solar. So they're kind of leading the charge. And how that's translating to new construction, is hard to say. As we all know, the cost of construction is so high as it is. When you add these additional energy improvements, it becomes that much more challenging. So, I can't say that I've seen a lot of the new construction directly focused on energy or environmental aspirations, but I think it's going to come, and if it does happen in Maine, it's going to largely be driven by the university system and what they're working on up there. There's some really, really creative things. It's pretty exciting.
I think
well, this also. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Michael.
Sorry. I was going to say, from a capital markets perspective, I think ESG, environmental social governance, is going to be a theme and a topic that we're going to continue to see have influence on commercial real estate. And at the boots on the ground level, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have specific green financing programs that borrowers can take advantage of. They get a 30% break on their rate. They get additional, which then leads to additional proceeds or potential for additional proceeds if they can make investments that will improve the energy efficiency of their buildings. So that's been one program that's been in, those programs have been in place for some time, and they've kind of helped lead the way for this movement towards ESG. You're now starting to see CMBS programs rolling out, trying to create green investment bonds that are then resellable in the market for investors who are looking to add that into their portfolios. You're starting to see Prologis, the largest industrial owner in the world, they just came out with an investment bond backed by several of their properties that are, green, having the solar panels on the roof yields. So I think ESG is just, again, is going to continue to influence and move forward in commercial real estate.
Well, I think it's also part of, the need for more electric going into some of these properties because of like bioscience, biolabs. They use quite a bit of power. So the infrastructure now has to support that. And I think a lot of these places are going to have to go to other sources to bring that in. And it might, in the long run, it probably would be less costly, especially with incentives that the government is giving, I would think.
I think, and Justin, you might be able to speak to this in Maine as well. There is, even though Vermont is so forward thinking with this, there has always been a push and pull with keeping the look and feel of our state as like natural and beautiful. So there is always a lot of pushback with where solar fields are so people can't see them, and wind turbines, are they going to be an eyesore for some people? So I think there's definitely a push and pull to, like, we don't even allow billboards on our highways. So while we're really pushing for that, there is still also that local community that wants to preserve what Vermont looks like naturally. So I think that some states will also see that pushback as well.
Oh yeah, every project in Maine is very controversial as well. The wind turbines that you can see from the top of Sugarloaf, you can see them all over the place, and that's a lot of folks are opposed to that. But at the same time, we're trying to, get as green as we possibly can. So there's the same push and pull as you guys are experiencing, for sure.
It's going to be interesting, but like everything changes. We all found that out in the past year. Yeah, but now let's go to something that's really taboo. I'm sorry. It used to be taboo. And the discussion, which is now mainstream, it's the cannabis industry. And the cannabis industry is going crazy right now, especially in New England, Maine and Vermont and New Hampshire. Well, New Hampshire, not as much, but Maine and Vermont, we hear a lot of people looking at those two markets to invest in as far as the cannabis cultivation, dispensaries, things of that nature. Even manufacturing of different products that work for the cannabis industry. What are you seeing in your markets for that industry?
I'll go first. It's been an extremely impactful industry for coming up on a decade now. Yeah, some things never change, and it's the interest and the demand in the cannabis industry. We are now a recreational and medical state. Retail there's cannabis stores on virtually every corner now. They're quite popular. Their product is absolutely diversified now, so there's a number of different products that they're producing, and the cultivation of it, the raw product, is happening in industrial parks. So they are competing as much as ever with other conventional tenants and use with life science, for example. They still have an ability to pay more, and savvy landlords are realizing they can charge a premium for cannabis as opposed to traditional users. But with that comes a myriad of issues and challenges, not the least Michael can speak to, is financing, and banks still won't touch it. It's still federally illegal. I think that's going to change sooner than later. I think this administration in particular probably is going to legalize it federally, probably within the first term, frankly. And what that does to the industry is going to be really interesting. Does that allow potentially the big boys to come in and take out all the smaller users and more local users that we're working with over the last decade? We're already starting to see some national interest in tenants in Maine. So I think what Maine in particular for this industry is going to have to do, sort of like our craft brewery scene, is rebrand it and really own the Maine, Made in Maine brand. And hopefully consumers will still have pay a premium for just that. and the product is that much better, cleaner. So it's still very impactful. We're getting calls every day, and it's really pretty much as challenging as it ever has been as well, though.
Has it helped your retail space?
Yeah, I mean, of course, but they're usually 1,500, 2,000 square feet, and there's, I say every corner. There's not every corner, but in Portland, there's probably already 8 or 9. That's quite a bit, but they're not huge stores. There have been a couple 10 to 15,000 square foot spaces that have been leased. One just near the main mall, actually, where they're going to do cultivation, production, testing, sort of in the back part of the building, and then retail towards the front. So there has been larger impact on the retail market, but fewer in the more common 1,000 square foot vape shop or whatever kind of thing.
We're a little bit behind Maine. So we are a medical state, but we aren't recreational yet. So we haven't seen them really come into the retail sector yet. I think it's on our 2021 legislative slate to vote on it. So I'm guessing we will see it by the end of the year for sure. But already, I think if you look at the CBD trend that happened in Vermont, the marijuana trend is just going to completely follow that. A handful of years ago, CBD business owners and growers came to the state and took off, small and large. It's just a major industry here. And I think that is just going to be the same exact thing that happens with the marijuana industry. Again, reiterating that Southern Vermont has a lot of farming land. So I think you're going to see some people kind of migrate to that area and then keep smaller retail locations in more of the suburban setting. The big thing that we've been facing on the CBD side, so I definitely think that's just going to translate over, is landlords are still very unclear on the legality of where they stand if they have a tenant who has a CBD business or has a marijuana business. Is it state, is it federal? So I've done a number of CBD deals where landlords you really have to convince them that this is a good tenant for them. And I think that's going to continue to happen until our state or nationally, it becomes more clear where the landlord responsibility is and where the tenant responsibility is. And I think on the industrial side of things, we already have a shortage. So I think that you're going to see a really strong increase in industrial rents in the next year or so. One area, pretty much all of our development on the office and retail side of things came to a screeching halt at the beginning of 2020, but industrial has not. They've continued to expand. So I think that at least we're trying to keep up with the demand, and we won't fall terribly behind. But I do think with a 2.5% vacancy rate and the lowest over a 10-year average, it's going to continue to go down until we get some substantial new development.
Yeah, and I know a lot of landlords that are also stockholders in the business they lease to, because that's something they work into that lease, because they can do that. Right now they have the opportunity to demand what they would like to get out of it. So,
but from a capital markets perspective, the availability of capital for cannabis-related properties is certainly segmented. The most readily available type of form of capital for the cannabis industry is, that retail center. Whereas Justin mentioned, it's a little 1,000 square foot unit, but it's amongst several other tenants, and you can almost underwrite the property as if the cannabis unit wasn't there. And in that case, and it's investor owned, non-related to the business. And in that case, there is capital available for that deal. It becomes more of a challenge when it becomes a single tenant building, or if it becomes owner related. Then the forms and types of capital change, and it becomes more of a hard money market, a private wealth market with higher cost of capital. And the interesting thing about the banking side of cannabis is there's this misconception that the banks can't service this industry. They actually can. The reason why they don't is because even though they are allowed to now, at any moment under the current regulations, it could change on them, and then they would be involved in a business that they're not supposed to be involved with. So there was last year, the Safe Banking Act, the Secure and Fair Enforcement Banking Act was passed in the House. It didn't make it through the Senate. It's one of at least a half a dozen bills which will make a more permanent banking regulation approval for banks to service this industry and then open up capital. But like you said, Rick, there's certainly from the availability of capital for this space, there's an eye towards, okay, what will happen if there is federal legalization? And I just brought capital to the small production, grower, user, retail space, and now someone else comes in, a large national player comes in and changes the market landscape. So it's a very segmented market. Some banks only serve medical, some will serve some recreational, and they are waiting for some additional color on the federal side.
Michael, is there that Safe Banking Act mentioned last year that didn't make it through the Senate was so disappointing, because to me, it's not just the, making a loan, it's a safety and security issue. There's so much cash that are in some of these facilities. To me, it's kind of dangerous. So I was really bothered that that didn't happen. Is there anything that you know of similar to it that's in the books for potentially this calendar year?
Like I said, the Safe Banking Act is one of a half a dozen bills being proposed, and I do think that there's a very strong likelihood that before the end, it's probably not going to happen first quarter, maybe not by second quarter, but it is certainly something that's on the radar and likely to happen, sooner rather than later. It's certainly going to have the support of the current administration.
Yeah,
but a lot
they see it. I'm sorry, Rick, for cutting. As you know, Justin and Kendra, not only are they looking at servicing this industry, but the current administration sees this as a social issue as well, an equality issue, right? A lot of the regulatory bodies have set up means to allow cannabis to help serve populations that have been negatively impacted by enforcement in the past. So they want to open up these capital markets. They want to open up banking because they see this as a business line that can help raise up social and demographic groups.
Interesting.
And there's also Lefty's Bank. Lefty is willing to lend anyone money at 35% interest. So we're getting close to the time to call it quits, but I want to end this on a positive note before we start taking some of the questions or going over some of the questions. What have you seen that will, we want to talk about a silver lining that we've come out of this pandemic, and because of the pandemic, there's been a silver lining. Something is stuck out that has been good for our market. And what have you seen that has been that silver lining?
I can go first. I think in our Vermont market, we always really were a big support local community, but this has just really enhanced that to the 10th degree. Early on in the pandemic, some of the local restaurants were overwhelmed with the amount of takeout orders they were getting. And as we progressed through, local retailers, if they had to close their doors, they went online and they would deliver to local homes. And people really were, if they were a store that they used to shop on at Church Street, they would shop online and just try to keep money coming in the door to local businesses. We've also seen, as I spoke to earlier, creative partnerships with local business owners, trying to consolidate spaces so that you're sharing rents or repurposing spaces in a creative way. And it's actually really benefiting the market because it's creating all of these new businesses that are much more diversified. And one larger project that I would say is a really bright light for us in Burlington is we have a city place development project that's been in the works for the past 5 years. We had an underground mall that was completely demolished about 5 years ago. And just between it changing hands and issues with the town, nothing has really happened in the last handful of years with building out the new mall. And through the pandemic, it changed hands once again, but 3 local investors became involved. And I think that has just been a tremendous help to really kickstart the project back into gear. They're local guys. They want to see the project come to fruition because one of the big things that we depend on is tourism and people coming to the city to shop. And by redeveloping a mall that would have 45,000 square feet of retail on the first level, and it would connect a number of streets so that they also become walkable, like Church Street, it would just really ramp up the retail opportunities that we have locally, and we think really drive people back into our market. And through the pandemic, we've seen a resurgence in energy to this project. And I think that that has been a really big silver lining. It's also been really nice for the community to see not everything has come to a standstill. We're still really pushing to get big projects done and to get people back to our market and shopping locally and supporting our local business owners.
Okay.
I got a couple. I think personally, one of the silver linings of this whole experience is sort of the normalizing of being at home and spending time with family and making it not so not taboo, but if you're telling a CEO that you have a client of yours that, hey, I'm taking Friday off, I'm going skiing with my kids, they're going to be much more supportive of that and understanding of that, I think, today than they would have been 12 months ago. So that's really I think a nice positive thing about this whole experience is that it's made us all realize and prioritize what's important. And then on a broader sense for the state of Maine, I'm really interested in manufacturing in particular. And as we've, I think, come to learn, we were too reliant on international trade and outsourcing. And I think a lot of those jobs and supply are going to come home. And Maine's got great opportunity because we're an old, historically manufacturing state. So we've got the education in the labor pool and the experience to really leverage that if that does come to fruition, which I do believe it will. So those onshoring of jobs and the storage and distribution of actual supply and product domestically, I think is a great opportunity for us moving forward.
Yeah, and just to expand on what Justin said, the storage and distribution of those materials, we're moving from that just-in-time flow to just in case. So we're building up our inventories and needing that for the next pandemic. One silver lining that I've heard recently, I was on a Boston University real estate alumni panel, and Steve DiFilippo, the owner of Davio's, was on there, and he made a great, an interesting point, saying that while there are certainly some restaurants that have had challenges, and we've lost some restaurants certainly through the pandemic, the retail landscape, the availability of space and cheaper space is allowing new restaurateurs to enter into the market. It's breaking down some barriers for them to get a space to open up. And he was at least excited to see some of those possibilities going forward.
Fantastic. I have all great information. I have a couple of questions that we have from the audience. The first one is from, first one I have to bring up. And the first one is from Lisa Maroney from the town of Chelmsford. And Lisa wants to know, how can the municipalities become more involved with site finders and be influenced through the decision-making process? Good question.
In Maine,
it stumped the panel.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think the answer varies greatly depending on the municipality and the actual situation at hand and what the opportunity is. We've got a couple towns in Greater Portland that are considering expanding industrial parks, so they've engaged with the brokerage community, and we've got a couple. They're not site search firms, but they're firms designed to reach out of the state and recruit to try to find new businesses to come. So there is certainly some of that work, but it largely, the specific town or city or opportunity.
Yeah, I would say in Vermont, our local government is really involved with both in-state and out-of-state bringing new companies to the area because we desperately need new large companies coming and starting businesses here. One of the big pushes before COVID was an international push towards like Montreal and Quebec and bringing companies down. And the local chamber actually created a whole arm that was connecting with companies up north, bringing them locally, and then connecting with local brokerages so that they were right on the front lines to find them space, to find creative ways to get new people into the market. I think town by town, here we also have a number of the towns surrounding Chittenden County have people in the local government who partner with local brokers and kind of are a go-to person for sites that are coming available, land development opportunities. So our local government's really involved in that here, but I can't speak to outside of the state.
Well, most of the municipalities that I know and I've worked with in the past, they always tend to work with the commercial broker, and they try to get a close relationship with most of the commercial brokers in the market, because the other guys that bring the deals to the table, you know. So, I mean, if that's not what they're doing, that's probably something they should go back and look at, because that's an important part of getting those companies in there.
And it's reciprocal. I mean, I was going to say it's also reciprocal in that, you know, anytime we get listings in any town, one of the first things we do is send it to town officials, just in case they've got, you know, they're oftentimes plugged in as well, the economic development office or whatever. They'll often have some good ideas. So it's a very reciprocal relationship with municipalities and brokerage.
Yeah, most of the surrounding towns of Burlington and our downtown have pages on their websites specifically for commercial brokerage. And so we can market our listings on their websites. So we just get it right to the people. It was kind of a project that they took on about 5 years ago, and it's been really beneficial because you get a lot of leads that way.
Well, it also, like Justin said, it's reciprocal, because you know, the broker gets the benefit from the leads that the city or town will send their way. It also, you know, who they can work with the city or town, and then the same thing, they can bring in the commercial accounts to that region or that market. One other question, and I think we answered this already, was some of the colleagues, this is from Peyton Taylor, some of the colleagues have shared office space being renovated to lab space. Have others seen that as well? And I think we hit on some of that, or repurposing some office space and warehouse or industrial space. Anyone want to add to that, or are we good?
The only other theme I'd mention on repurposing office space, particularly downtown, we've got a couple towers that we're not doing very well in the pandemic and are really struggling now. Some of the largest vacancies, and I'm curious if those are ultimately going to be converted to residential. I think that's probably going to be the highest and best use. It's very expensive to redevelop it that way, but I just don't see Class B downtown tower office space being in very high demand for the coming potentially years. So, and you know, I just think residential is, as we all know, is hot as ever.
I'd agree. We don't have a lot of lab space in Vermont, but I would say, and we don't have as many tower buildings. I would say our highest one is like 8 stories, and then most are between 5 and 6. But we have a lot of older buildings that have been converted into offices, which I think are going to be converted back into residential. We already have a much higher demand for residential than we do for commercial space. So I think you're going to see a lot of that conversion. And I also think in office buildings, you're going to see a lot of conversion to smaller spaces, which again is really expensive for the landlord. But our state has seen a lot of people migrate here amid COVID to kind of get out of the cities because they can work remotely. And I think when all of this settles down, people are still going to want a place to go, but it's going to be a much smaller office. So the 10,000 square foot footprints that we've seen in some of our larger buildings, I think are really going to get cut up to smaller sizes so that more local people can utilize them.
I got to tell my brokers to get excited about 1,200 square foot office space deals that we're going to be doing for the next 5 years. Super.
Well, I want to thank you all. Unfortunately, we've come to the end, but I want to thank you all. Great information. It sounds like the areas are coming back. They're starting to see some action again. You know, so that's a positive thing in my eyes. And I hope you all do well come 2021 and everyone stays safe. But I want to thank our panel. I want to thank everyone for attending. I want to thank everyone that attended through Facebook as well. We do appreciate it. And I want to also thank our sponsors, which is NorthMarq, MChase, and US Pavement. And if anyone wants to get a hold of any of the, reach any of the speakers, they can go to the YouTube recorded show, and all their contact information will be at the end of the show. And I hope to see everyone at our future webinars. We have our Rhode Island commercial real estate market webinar coming up March 17th. We have our corporate roundtable for the Mogul architects, which is going to be a great show. And that is going to be on March 25th. And we have a North of Boston show on March 24th. I hope to see you all there, and anyone that needs any information on any future events, you can contact me, Rick Kaplan, at the New England Real Estate Journal. And I want to thank you all again. Have a pleasant afternoon and stay safe. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Rick.
Thank you.
Rick. Bye, everybody. Have a good day.